Hey everyone, welcome back. I wanted to have a quick chat with you all about House Republicans, their apparent legislative priorities, and why it makes me think that they're not all that concerned about trying to win the majority in 2024. Having now resolved the speakership debacle, Republicans are starting to pass bills in the House. And whenever there's divided government, those first bills are always about messaging rather than actual lawmaking, and that's perfectly acceptable. Being able to actually put out your policies in a very concrete form and say, this is what we're about, these are the kind of policies we'll pass if you give us complete control of government, is a very good way to set the stage for the next election cycle, in this case 2024. And a lot of times, obviously, you would want to start by addressing the major concerns of the previous cycle. The top three issues from 2022 were inflation, abortion, and crime. So, obviously, we would expect to see Republicans touch on all three of these issues, and in their own way, they have. So let's break down how the Republicans are deciding to go at these issues, how it relates to the voters, and why I think they're concerned about a slightly different set of elections in 2024 that isn't the general election. Let's start off with the number one issue, inflation. This is the only issue where the GOP haven't put forward a piece of legislation. And quite simply, that's because they don't actually have a solution. It actually reminds me a lot of repealing and replacing Obamacare. It's something that the GOP campaigned on for 6 or 7 years, and then when they got power in 2017, suddenly admitted that, oh yeah, we didn't actually come up with a plan, that's just something we said. And eventually they tried to put something together, and that failed, and they did not repeal or replace Obamacare. Turns out that governing is a little more difficult than that. And it's the same with the current spike in inflation. This isn't a domestic issue for the US, it is a global issue being experienced by tons of different countries. And some of the factors influencing it include the fallout from the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and other instabilities in global financial markets. So there really isn't a neat little domestic solution that the GOP can put forward in order to make inflation better in the short term. However, they have found the one way that they could make it worse in the short term, which would be forcing the US to default on its debts by not raising the debt ceiling. If the US defaulted, interest rates would go up, and the value of the dollar would come down, making it more expensive for the average voter to acquire money, as well as decreasing the value of the money that they already have. And this doesn't really seem like a good thing for the voters, and certainly not something you would want to do, especially given that Republicans are broadly perceived by the electorate to be beneficial for the economy. Republicans would be very quickly labeled with the blame for not raising the debt ceiling, as Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans have said that they are in favor of raising the debt ceiling, and the Biden administration is also in favor. So this would fall squarely on the heads of House Republicans, and come 2024, the voters would know exactly who to hold responsible for their current economic issues. The next issue is abortion. The GOP have already passed 2 bills on this topic, both of which seek to create new federal restrictions on access to abortion and family planning through various means. Now, you would think that they would know better than to do that, as during the 2022 midterms, a vast majority of the American electorate came out and stated that they were in favor of a woman's right to choose, especially moderates, independents, and young voters. In fact, this whole issue was credited to the Democrats being able to hang on to control of the Senate, and the House GOP being limited to a 4-seat majority. But even so, each of the 4 seats that makes that majority is a district that President Biden won in 2020, and then a Republican was able to flip in 2022. The GOP continues to push down a firm anti-abortion policy path. They may lose more of the moderate, independent, and young voters that might have favored inflation or crime over abortion in the particular 2022 midterm, and it may set them up for an unfavorable result in those same seats in 2024, costing them their very slim majority. And the last issue, of course, is crime, and the GOP has made a very interesting statement with their very first piece of legislation for the new Congress, which essentially says, defund the federal police. And of course, I am referring to the IRS. The GOP passed a bill that would rescind the funding given to the IRS to hire new staff as well as replace retiring staff over the next decade. Now, I know we don't traditionally think of the IRS as a law enforcement agency, but I've spent a lot of my career working for the Department of Justice, and in a lot of the cases I've worked, the IRS has been instrumental in bringing people to justice, especially when it concerns the GOP's favorite 2 types of crime to talk about on the Hill, gangs and drug cartels. Hiding their individual transactions or smaller criminal activity is admittedly relatively simple. It's a matter of simply creating enough distance between the transaction that once you get to court, it becomes difficult to prove the connections. However, the IRS is often able to step in and say, well, we can't connect the person to the drugs, we can connect the person to the money, and they didn't pay taxes on all that money. A famous example of this is, of course, Al Capone. Everyone knew that he was involved in bootlegging, gambling, extortion, bribery, a whole host of crimes. But he didn't go to jail for any of that. He went to jail for tax evasion. So by defunding the IRS, they're really cutting the Department of Justice capacity to go after these major criminal organizations that they claim they want to bring to justice. Additionally, going back to the inflation point, the IRS helps recoup a lot of tax revenue that would otherwise be lost through their enforcement operations. So, by losing all of that government revenue, it would actually make the deficit worse and therefore also make inflation worse. So, again, this particular bill hits two different points of our major issues from the past election in a negative way. And again, I just don't think that this is going to play well for the GOP with those moderate and independent voters that they desperately need in order to hold on to their majority. Obviously, these policies aren't geared towards the moderate, independent, and young voters that the GOP would need in order to maintain or even expand its majority. Instead, these are very tailored towards the base of the Republican Party, especially the more Freedom Caucus, Make America Great Again wing of the Republican Party. So, why is that? I think the short answer is that House Republicans don't think they can actually keep this majority in 2024. There's just too many uncertainties. They know they're already losing one seat, which is currently held by Representative Santos due to all of those scandals, and that only leaves them with 3 seats left. There are more seats than that flipped from Biden districts in 2020 to Republican in 2022, and those could easily flip back. Additionally, they don't know who's going to be at the top of the ticket. If they get a bad candidate like former President Donald Trump, that would have a very negative impact on their down-ballot races, and would almost certainly cost them any chance at getting the majority in the House. So instead of focusing on the general election in 2024, I think that House Republicans are taking a slightly more selfish lane and focusing on making sure that they don't lose their 2024 primaries. This actually makes a lot of sense because, frankly, when most Republicans lose their seats, they don't lose it to a Democrat. Due to gerrymandering and other factors, most Republicans are in safe red districts, and therefore, they're not really suffering any threat from a Democratic challenger. Obviously, there are exceptions, such as what happened with Lauren Boebert's seat this year, where she only won by 500 votes in what should have been a very safe Republican district, but by and large, most Republicans aren't really that concerned about losing to a Democrat. They are concerned, however, to losing to another Republican. And this is a trend we've seen going back to the Tea Party in 2010, where a farther right Republican will come and challenge the incumbent and say, you haven't been fighting enough, you've compromised too much. There's a whole list of things. Generally, it can be summed up in the term rhino, Republican in name only, which is the new thing for it. Basically saying, you don't represent the primary voters, so I'm going to get rid of you. And then, once it comes to the general, because they're in a safe Republican district, whoever wins the primary wins the general election. So, it's a little bit self-serving, but frankly, if they don't think they can hold on to the majority, there's no reason to stick their necks out and take some of these more risky votes that might hurt them in a primary election. Instead, they might as well just play it safe, secure their primary victories, and kind of wait to see if whoever ends up as the presidential nominee in 2024 can carry them to another majority. Either way, Republican representatives right now seem to be a lot more interested in keeping their own butts in Congress than keeping enough Republican seats to hold the majority. Think about it. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more of my content, subscribe to the channel and make sure to hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever I post new videos. If you want to support me on my other social media platforms, all of the links you need will be in the video description below. If you have any questions about this video or another topic that you'd like me to discuss, leave me a comment and I'll do my best to get you an answer. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.